Okay, Ms. Lloyd, are we ready? Recorder? Mr. Reesbeck, ready? Okay. Here's that we're ready. I'll call the January 13th, 2014 meeting of the Pittsboro Board of Commissioners to order and ask for a moment of silence. Thank you. And Mr. Farrell, would you like to lead us in the...
Certainly. Should everybody rise and remove their hats for the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any, anybody aware of any changes that are necessary to the agenda? I have one potential that we could wait till next week if we want to, and that is, as I was reading through this, I remembered Mayor Bowler's statement that we needed to place him on the TARPO board. Now, we don't have to do that tonight, but if the board wants to add that and pick one from amongst us to do that.
Well, that was actually something that I had on my mind as well, and
add that under new business?
yeah, let's do that.
Number three. Number the appointment of a member of the TARPO board. Okay, with that change, do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the agenda is approved. On the consent agenda, we have the minutes from November 25th and 9th. We have an appointment to the ABC board, which is actually just a clarification. As I read it, apparently there was a misunderstanding about Mr. Kelly's term when he was originally appointed, so we have that on the consent agenda, extending him to the standard 3-year term. We have confirmation of our delegate to the COG board. We have an amendment to the capital project ordinance for Creel Street. And that's all on the consent agenda.
I would like to table to the next meeting the minutes, only because I have not had a chance to go through them.
Both sets?
December 9th?
Both sets.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Do we have agreement on that?
Yes.
We have table item 1 on the consent agenda. With item 1 table, do I have a motion to approve the remainder of the consent agenda?
So moved. Second?
Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Consent agenda is passed. Moving on to citizen matters, we have 4 speakers signed up to speak under citizen matters. First is, I believe it's Krista Cohen.
Forgive me, I've got a cold, so please pretend this is coming out well and with enthusiasm to the best of my ability.
And state your name and address for the record,
Okay,
please.
I am Esther Cohen. I reside on Van Thomas Road in Pittsboro, 688 Van Thomas Road. I chair the Ag Advisory Board for Chatham County. The board is made up of a diverse group of men and women from across the county. We represent a cross-section of agricultural practices and ag businesses. we intentionally stay out of politics. We're not big on having people tell us what to do with our land, and we're not big on telling others what to do with theirs. So understand that for me to be here is a pretty big deal. There are almost 7,200 acres slotted for Chatham Park development, with 70% impervious surfaces projected. That's almost 5,100 acres under cement or pavement, or whatever else does not allow water through. That is a lot of rainfall diverted from a usual path. There is nothing in the Chatham Park development plan that addresses the development's use of wells. After the initial public presentation by the developers, I asked that very question. I was told by one of the presenters that he could not imagine more than 20 or 30% of the park's needs coming from wells. I don't know exactly where that leaves us, but at 4.4 million gallons a day, plus an extra 2 million gallons for assorted needs, 20% is an awful lot of groundwater. The issue has to be addressed clearly. 20% of the park's needs, on top of diverting that many acres of rainfall, will have to have a significant impact on the county's groundwater supply. Before this project starts, we respectfully suggest that quantification of water sources, including groundwater, be clearly addressed. No farmer or forester or horticulturist stands alone in what they do. The feed supplies we buy, the parts we purchase, the fuel we purchase, the places we bank. This is an agricultural county first and foremost, and the impact on our shared water sources really needs to be considered before greenlighting any project with this potential impact on our community. Without water, farmers die. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cohn. Our next speaker is Mike Watkins.
Mr. Mayor, Town Board, good evening. My name is Mike Watkins. I live in 400 Prince Creek in Pittsboro. As an adjacent owner to the Chatham Park proposed plan, I endorse everything that Esther's just said. I am particularly concerned about the likely future for my well. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here to talk about the RFQ. After such a courageous vote that you guys made in the town hall at the end of last year to defer a rezoning decision on Chatham Park pending consultant review, I have to say I was a little disappointed to discover that the RFQ scope of services was couched in such limited and really quite superficial terms. Firstly, the first concern is that the consultant is asked to confer only with the town manager and town staff. That precludes the citizens of Pittsboro, and that clearly is a big issue. We should really have a public input process to that. Secondly, the consultant, it says, may be asked to present findings to the town board. I'm sure that should have read, is required to present their findings to the town board, and at a public meeting. Thirdly, and worse, the planning professional is asked for recommendations for marginally improving the document and development process. Marginally? There's only one city in the entire United States of America that even remotely compares to the population densities proposed in this master plan. Believe it or not, that's Los Angeles in California, and even LA doesn't actually come up to the same levels of density. Chatham Park proposes more than twice the population density of Cary, North Carolina. It squeezes the entire population of Chapel Hill into half its space. Marginally. I would suggest, Mr. Mayor, Board of Commissioners, we need thorough, expert, exhaustive examination and critique of the document at every level. I also suggest that Chatham Park investors should welcome that level of scrutiny and be perfectly happy to cover the cost of it. If not, one really should ask why. Thank you for your time.
Next speaker, Elaine Chioso.
Good evening, and I have a handout for you. So I am a signator to the letter you received about the RFQ, and want to echo everything that Mike just said about it. I think until the issue of the density and the impervious surface is addressed with Chatham Park, no action should be taken to approve their rezoning request. And the more we understand what this density and impervious surface means, really the more shocking it is. So this first page is actually a chart that Mike created, but using US Census data, simply taking different zip codes in Cary and comparing it to what Chatham Park looks like. So as you can see, we'd be looking at a population with the 55,000 people, even taking out the commercial areas and open space. We'd be looking at the red line on the bottom there. We'd be looking at almost 12 people per acre, and Cary is at 4.8 per acre in the most dense part of Cary. As you can see, other parts of Cary, Apex, Morrisville, don't quite rise to that level. So that's that 11.9 density, and as Mike just told you, that's a little bit more dense than Los Angeles. So are we really thinking that's what we want next door to Pittsboro? It's really quite astonishing. The second page takes information from a journal article that was actually done by the USDA Forest Service and published in Urban Forestry and Urban Greening. And this shows impervious surfaces in cities. So what they were looking at, what the article was really looking at, was urban forests and what do various cities have in the way of natural areas other than pavement, other than rooftops. And so this chart shows you, all the way going up that scale, where you can see a place like Atlanta is coming in at about 35% impervious, all the way up to New York City, which is a little over 60%. And Chatham Park is proposing 70% impervious surface on their land area. So of course you can see that's even bigger that's more impervious surface than New York City has. Would they really build that? Are we really expecting them to put in skyscrapers? Possibly not. But why is it in the plan if it's something that we wouldn't want to have next door? I refer you back to where it shows up in the master plan is on the current master plan, page 33, under section 7, development standards. Number 6 says, and this is their master plan, approval of the PDD and PDD master plan for Chatham Park grants approval for Chatham Park to develop under the high density option. And of course, if you look at Pittsboro's definition of high density option under your own language, that's 70%. So I hope you'll look at these and think about this very important question, I think, that sits in the master plan right now. Thank you. Do you have any questions? Okay.
Next, Jeffrey Starkweather.
Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners, fellow citizens. As you know, you received a copy of, in an email form, this letter that was sent by Pittsboro Matters signed. I don't know if you had a chance to read it or not. And there were a number of documents attached. I want to start by saying we want to thank the board again for their starting this process with their vote back on November 25th. And also thank the manager for getting this process started by writing an RFQ. Now, our understanding was that the RFQ would be used to invite people, teams to put in their applications, and then it would be up to the board in negotiating with the whoever is picked to determine the scope, the timetable, and the cost of this process. So that's what we're operating under. If I'm wrong, I'd like to hear that. And I also want to say that even though we have raised questions about the scope, I understand from reading this that this was these are examples. And the document itself sort of says that by saying, shall include but not limited to. So we just felt at this point we needed to get out what we felt as citizens who have been working with this process of what some of the scope would be. And some of that has been brought up. Obviously, from my perspective, the most important issue that a team should address is the process. We had an initial process with the PDD that was altered with a revised master plan, and it went to a two-step process. Now, over the holidays, I didn't have time for the last several months because of all this. I called up a number of friends of mine, people I went to school with and I've worked with, planners, who in most cases are retired or consultants now, and asked them what they knew about Chatham Park, and told them a little bit about where we were, and tried to get their perspective. And virtually to a person, they all said the most important thing that a consultant should be doing at this time should be reflecting and giving you input about what the process you have and if there's alternative processes. And in conversations, at least with one person, I said, well, you know, I have to admit that early on, because I thought this thing was just rushing through, I threw out the idea, well, maybe we could do a two-step process. And I admitted that I didn't know whether this would work, legally, practically, so forth. So now we have a proposed two-step process. And so I asked these planners, what is the best tool? And they all said development agreements. That is the new tool for large developments like this. The kind of PDD ordinance is designed mostly for much smaller developments than we're talking about. And then I asked them, okay, we have now a proposed two-step process. Are there other examples of other places that are doing a two-step process? And the one answer I got was Chapel Hill. Now, ironically, I had sent you a thing from Chapel Hill's the Chapel Hill North development agreement process. But that was before, that whole thing that took like 6 or 8 years was before they had developed the two-step process. I didn't know till I went back and looked again that they had actually developed this process. And I've sent you some of those documents, and I have a number of them I'm going to give to the manager. I can't afford to copy all this stuff every meeting. And he might provide it for, or you can look on the website, because there's a great little I gave you the link. There's a great little session that was done where David Owens, like the expert on this, talked about this. One of the big advantages of a development agreement is it gets around the vested rights problem. So you don't get in a situation where the developer can come back with a common law, or which is they've spent all this money and say, okay, well, you have to approve us. So that eliminates that problem from the town's perspective. So, and also you had a speech here, or public input, from Amy Tiemann, I don't know if you remember her, with Obie Creek. She was talking about what a great process that was. It turns out that that was one of the processes that is being done through this two-step development agreement process. If you look at the documents, the amount of public input that would occur before you get through the first step is pretty extensive. Workshops, all kinds of things. In addition to that, which I thought was one of the interesting parts, was this technical team that they have contracted on a regular basis with these experts, sort of like the people we're hiring, that would regularly come in on a contractual basis and review these plans, both at the initial phase and at the second phase. So I'm not saying that this is the alternative, but I think it just gives an example why, in terms of the scope of what you do, we should be asking whoever we bring in, is our process the best process? I don't think it is. And are there other processes that would work for Pittsboro? Finally, and I would mention that there's been mention about the density issue. Reston, Virginia would be a good example for someone to look at. Because Reston, Virginia started out as a new town. It was a greenfield, so it wasn't in another town, it was just out in the country. Reston, Virginia was totally in the country, halfway between Dulles and Washington, D.C. Had virtually the same acreage, 7,100 acres when they started. They now have about 9,500 acres in total, 58,000 people. 1/3 of the density of, or excuse me, 30% less density than Chatham Park would be if it was developed on the acreage it has now. Now I've been to Reston, I've seen pictures of Reston. Reston is the most expensive city in the Washington, D.C. area, about $445,000 per house. It has terrible traffic problems. And yes, it has some nice areas, but it's surrounded by sprawl. Now, I think that would be a good example, because that's pretty much the same thing we're talking about here. To have people look at, is this what we want next to Pittsboro, or part of Pittsboro? And I tend to think the answer of virtually everybody in the town would be no. We want something different. So I think it's worth looking at, because that was cited, by the way, by the developers in their initial plan. Finally, Timothy Peatley is a professor of planning at the University of Virginia, got his PhD at Chapel Hill. And I've heard him speak. He's one of the world's foremost sustainable community experts in the country. And he was invited by Chatham Park, actually, to make a speech here to talk about all the sustainability stuff he's done. I didn't know this until I started looking up the whole issue of ethics for land use, but he actually wrote a book on ethics of land use. And I'm going to email you a copy of this, which I think is a useful tool to have. But I'll just give you 3 and then I'll close it out, of his ethical issues, which I think directly impinge on what we've been dealing with. 1, land use policy decisions must be formulated through a fair and equitable process. Land use policy meaning must provide the opportunity for all interested and affected parties to participate. Second one, land development must be viewed as a privilege, permissible at the discretion of the collective, which is us, subject to the conditions of the collective. Land ownership does not imply the right to radically change the environmental integrity of the land. And the last one, and there's a whole bunch of them here. Ethical land use policy sustains and protects natural ecosystem. Ethics requires a small human footprint. So I thank you for what you're doing, and we appreciate you considering some of the input we're giving on this. Thanks. I'll give you a copy of this since you only had an email. Formatted on that one. Thanks. In addition to the stuff that I gave you, there's some additional things in here, so I'm going to give them to the manager. If you want them back, email to us as well.
Okay, I show no other public expression speakers signed up. Is that the case? Anybody here who wants to speak but didn't sign up? Okay, in that case, we'll move on to old business. First item is rezoning request at 117 East Salisbury Street. Mr. Bass, will you introduce this one?
Yes, sir, thank you.
This is rezoning request 2013-03, Stewart rezoning, property located at 117 East Salisbury Street. The proposed rezoning is from highway commercial of C2 classification to the O&I district, office and institutional. We had a public hearing on this item on December 9th. So this is the comments primarily from the applicants. Didn't receive any other comments after the public hearing. Just to refresh your memory, this was it was built as a residential home and has been used as an office for a number of years now. And this would represent a downzoning from the more intense commercial district to the office and institutional district, which also allows for a residential use again. So that was the primary reason for the proposed rezoning. And then also attached is our ordinance that would approve this one.
Thank you. Does the applicant wish to make a presentation?
They're here, but I
Okay,
think
they're just here to answer questions, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess any questions from the board members?
I just have one question. On the office and institutional now, this could still go back as residential, is that correct?
Correct.
It allows for single-family residential use, so in other words, somebody could live there.
Right, okay.
Make a motion that we approve the rezoning.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the recommended ordinance for rezoning this property. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Congratulations, you got your rezoning.
Thank you.
Next item is abandonment of a portion of South Street. And Mr. Bass, you want to introduce this for us?
This item goes back. We originally had the public hearing for the partial right-of-way abandonment on October 28th. The town adopted a resolution giving notice of the town's intent to abandon this portion of right-of-way on September 9th. And there in the packet, I've included the petition from Chatham County to abandon this portion of South Street. Also included a tax map and an aerial photo to try and better illustrate the location of what we're talking about here. The area referenced is now part of the county site for the Justice Center. It's part of the parking lot pedestrian walkway. And when we approved the site plan, there was also an encroachment agreement that referred specifically to this right-of-way. And I also included that in your packet because I know some of the folks weren't on the board at that time. I've also included a couple photos and went through some pictures. That's the approximate area we're talking about. And I guess the other half of the street that the Justice Center is now sitting on, I think that portion was abandoned 10 or 12 years ago.
Looks like to me it's already abandoned.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
So it just has
a
to be
creek
legally.
walkway now.
Yeah.
Well, you make a good point. We've approved a site plan that showed the demolition of the street and the installation of this walkway with lighting and landscaping. We entered into an encroachment agreement with the county to allow them to do that in the public right-of-way. Passed a resolution of intent to abandon the street. I think we should follow through and make a motion to abandon the street as proposed.
Second.
Okay, that's one quick question.
Yes.
Have we not also kept our utility easement through there, so if we need to get a utility, we can.
The ordinance in your package does that.
Does that? Okay.
There's a specific, one of the item numbers that gets into that, so, yeah.
And I would ask another legal question. I suppose this renders the encroachment agreement void.
So it's been moved and seconded that we adopt the ordinance closing South Street. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries 5-0. First item of new business is a water allocation request from the Women's Child Care Facility.
Yes, this item is coming to you as a formal request for wastewater allocation. This is required now because of our adopted allocation policy. I've attached a spreadsheet to the memo which describes those to date. This is the 9th allocation request we've had. It's currently a request for 900 gallons of wastewater to construct a child daycare facility. And that's within the first phase. They would, once the daycare facility is established, they would come back and for a second allocation request when they're operating in full capacity, hopefully within 2 years of operation. And you have attached there a letter from the consulting engineer documenting the request in the 2 different phases. And staff recommends approval of the proposed request.
Any questions from the board?
I'm just curious, do they plan to convert the existing house?
No, it would be new construction, so you'll be seeing a site plan.
Motion to approve.
Second?
I'd like to make one comment about the site plan. That driveway location is going to be awfully close to Hillsborough Street. And with the idea of expanding the facility to upwards of 70 individuals, it's a lot of folks dropping children off for daycare. And I think the queue, since I imagine a lot of the turning movements will be a left turn trying to get into the facility, that perhaps we consider locating the driveway at the furthest extent possible from Hillsborough on their site plan.
Okay.
It's been moved. Any further questions? Been moved and seconded that we grant this allocation of water. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The allocation of water passes unanimously. Excuse me. Next item of new business is relates to a NPDS discharge permit modification. Presentation by Town Engineer Fred Royal, please.
Good evening. This is going to be relatively brief discussion on my part, answer any questions. The background, we discussed it at the workshop last Saturday, so I think it's relatively fresh on our minds. The big picture is the town does have a 3.22 MGD permit, million gallons a day, for wastewater discharge, with 2.47 permitted for Hall River discharge and 0.75 for Robeson Creek. So what this item contemplates is to submit major permit modification application to the state to transfer 0.499, just shy of 500,000 gallons a day, from the Hall River to Robeson Creek. Thinking behind that is we have an existing footprint at the wastewater plant that we believe we can utilize for this addition, so we're not purchasing real estate or doing major costly capital improvements in that it's not a brand new facility, it's an addition to our existing facility. And the discharge into Robeson Creek, we believe, is achievable, the increase with the major permit modification. Backing up, the town did have some meetings with Diener, and we also had some accompanied letters from the Haw River Assembly and from the Robeson Creek Watershed Council endorsing this idea. And we've got the numbers from the state that says the creek can handle it, and we've now just got to prove to them that we can meet the phosphorus and the nitrogen limits with this increase, and we believe that we can. We have a lot of time on our hands to work this out. I believe 2019 is sort of our goalpost for phosphorus, but according to Randy Hurd, we've already got that in the bag. Of course, we've got to look at it with the new, if we do new technology, we can look at that a little more closely with the cost analysis, etc. So what this permit, major permit modification would provide the town, if it's approved by Diener, they would have a public hearing, is to just basically transfer just shy of 500,000 gallons per day average annual effluent into Robeson, and we would just reduce it by that amount into the Haw and leave it at that. So we would retain the 3.22 MGD permit that we have. The thinking is also that we can use this additional capacity for future growth in Pittsboro, while we do have about almost 2 MGD left in Haw River for future needs. I have a spreadsheet that shows we're maybe at 190,000 gallons allocation available still with our 0.75. So this would up our available allocation, so when new businesses come to town, we have plenty of room to grow. You could even look at the moratorium if you'd like, if you want to keep it in place. It's just another discussion point. But so that's it in a nutshell. It doesn't give us permission to build anything. It just gives us a permit to begin the process. So it costs about $1,030 to do the application. So we would look at the wastewater budget for this year and probably take the funding from that if you would like to move forward. That's pretty much all I have.
Fred, could you talk a little bit about what you think the timeline would be from submission to approval to, and I guess once you get approval, then we could talk about what would be a next step after?
Sure. I believe the public hearing is a 90-day process. So you're looking at 3 months. Then they would issue, probably another month after that, we would get the permit modification, somewhere in that ballpark. So we're talking maybe 5 months out to get the modification completed.
Okay.
Beyond that, we have it, and it has an expiration date of 5 years.
So then the board could make a decision to hire an engineer after that approval, or if we wanted to be more aggressive, we could identify an engineer even ahead of time, not necessarily give them any task orders that would require any payments or anything, but if we wanted an expedited
Sure.
timeline, we could put out an RFQ for an engineer even before this got approved.
Absolutely.
Sort of banking on it being approved, and then get the engineer started as soon as the approval came in. So we have more than one option here. Okay. Any questions or comments from the board?
Yeah. Fred, help me understand a couple of the dates. We were talking about 2019,
Right.
and 2021. And reading through this document, it suggests that the TN limits would be kicked out to 2021 if in fact had an authorization to construct by 2019.
Correct. Total nitrogen. And one of my sentences, I think, is misleading on phosphorus side. We've got to meet phosphorus 2016.
We're still held to that
Yeah,
date.
yeah. Yeah, we have a Robeson Creek TMDL and we have a Jordan Lake TMDL, so, but like I had mentioned, Randy's been working really hard to deal with the phosphorus issue, and so he believes with the additional flows, our current technology would still work. However, we could get an engineering firm on board and look at various technologies, processes to see how we can, look at the phosphorus. It might be a sequence batch reactor process, it might be a current process, it might be anaerobic, I'm not sure, but we could look at all the costs to do all these things and then come up with a design selection with phosphorus in mind and nitrogen in mind.
And this request for just under 500,000 gallons preserves our existing EIS and doesn't require revisiting that document.
No.
And that document establishes 2 discharge points, one at Robeson, one at the Hall, with the treatment plant in the existing, basically in the same spot.
Well, yes, the EIS, if you're asking what the EIS alternative was, selected alternative of the EIS,
Yeah.
that was essentially the alternative 3. It's a new 3.22 plant at a different location.
At a different location.
Mm-hmm.
I
Like
thought it was
adjacent, I believe.
But in the same
Yes.
general
Mhm.
area.
Same area.
Okay. So
Because it contemplated the pumping distance to the Hall River. That was part of it.
always been a concern of mine that
Right.
we seem to be pumping west to pump east.
Right.
But the point that I'm making now is that this request is not requiring revisiting the EIS. which
That's
we
my
spent
understanding.
A lot of money on.
Yeah. The Diener advised us to keep it under 0.5 for that very reason.
Right. Okay.
It will make it a major wastewater treatment plant. It would be over 1 MGD, which would mean our fee goes up annually from $800 to $3,400. So, but we would have a lot of capacity. So,
Fred, what kind of time frame would we be looking at as far as if the permit and all went through and we went ahead with this, what would we be looking at?
I think we could probably do the preliminary engineering in a year. And we could probably do the permitting in 6 months. And we could probably get our bid documents and everything else put together in another 6 months. So you could probably start looking at letting a bid, in 2 years if we really wanted to be aggressive.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You said the application fee is 1033 and comes out of wastewater budget, is that right?
That's right. Mm-hmm. Randy indicated that he's got some monies in the budget for fees and permitting that he thinks we could just come right out of. I can confirm that with him through Mandy.
Does this permit modification in any way lock into the point discharge at the existing plant? Or if it moves 1,000 feet downstream, does this permit modification hinder the ability to change that point of discharge?
It right now it does not contemplate moving the effluent location.
So if a new plant is constructed and it's further downstream, the discharge point
Mhm.
needs to be back at this location, the existing location?
Not necessarily. It could be farther downstream.
Okay.
And I think the EIS basically assumed that the current plant would be decommissioned
Right.
upon completion. So that discharge location would go away and a new one would arrive.
Right. Okay. So that was kind of contemplated.
Mhm.
Okay.
So, once this application has been submitted and we've got the results back, Mayor Terry was talking about having the engineers already in place for that.
Mhm.
Now, they would also be looking at the total phosphorus and total nitrous
Yes.
at that particular point, the engineers would be
Absolutely.
doing all that.
Yeah, we would want them to help us looking at all the technologies available and looking at our current facility to see, what kind of upgrades, modifications would be necessary for each of those technologies, and then we can cost it out and come up with the best project.
Well, what about, let me ask you one more thing,
Sure.
in reference to Robeson Creek being impaired in a certain way. I know
Mhm.
before it was in reference to chlorophyll, and now it's still for aquatic life.
Mhm.
So at that particular point, is that something that you would be looking at that also after we've gotten that particular application approved?
Yes. The aquatic life issue is mostly due to non-point source runoff, stormwater up in the watershed. So it really isn't associated with this one discharge point from a single pipe. The concern the state really had on the single pipe originally was the stream was considered to be an estimated zero flow stream, meaning it dried up during drought. And I think we were able to show them that, in fact, it doesn't dry up during drought at this location, and that adding more discharge from this location would not necessarily degrade the stream. In fact, it may help it during drought because it's relatively clean water entering the creek that would actually cause flow during a drought. So the issues back down to phosphorus and nitrogen, which and total suspended solids and things like that. So we to maintain.
Well, just to add some history here, I think this is a fairly easy decision. Remembering back when we were first processing the EIS, the town originally asked Diener to put, I think, all of the discharge into Robeson Creek, and when they said, no, that can't happen, we said, well, put as much as we can into Robeson Creek. And they said, well, you're not getting any increase, and we asked the second time, and they said, no, you're not getting anything past $750,000, and then we asked a third time, and they said, well, part of no do you not understand, so we stopped asking, but so I think this is, for me, it's an easy decision. But I'll ask if the other board has, the rest of the board members have any questions. Yes, we do need a motion to authorize the town manager and the engineer to request this NPDS permit modification of Diener.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Commissioner Vaughn and seconded by Commissioner Fiocco. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. We may proceed with the permit application change. Okay, we added a third new business item, and this is to one of amongst us to take on the duties formerly handled by Mary Bowler as our representative on the TARPA board. And I have a question for Mr. Bass. Does this representative need to be an elected official? I know you already go to those meetings in one capacity, but
I think so.
yeah, I've never been to one, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think so.
So they have two kinds of membership.
Yeah,
Planners go,
the
and
staff goes and then
there's usually an elected official from each municipality or county.
right.
Okay, to make sure that was the case.
Well, I'd like to express my interest in representing this board and reporting back to this board at these meetings. The Triangle Area Rural Planning Organization is something I have a lot of interest in attending meetings. Being in the profession, I'm most interested to attend.
They usually meet every other month, and most often in Sanford. And they're usually dry as dust.
It's amazing the things I find exciting.
Well, I can certainly support Commissioner Fiocco because I do not have an interest in going to these meetings, so.
I agree, I can support that since he does enjoy it.
Would somebody like to make a nomination?
I'd like to nominate Commissioner Fiocco to serve as the Charco representative.
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Commissioner Fiocco stands appointed to the carport board. And do we need to send a letter, or do we need to send a letter to them?
I can ask, but,
Maybe it's simple as it, maybe you
Yes.
or
Yeah,
Mr.
let me,
Bruce Beck can send an email.
it's somehow or another though, I think you're right, I don't know if it needs to be a letter, but we need to
Notify them.
let Matt, the guy from the COG
Yeah.
that handles all the administrative duties, he needs to know who our person is. But
I
I'll
think-
send him an email tomorrow.
Ask him what's required. I think if the email is sufficient, let's just do that.
Yeah.
Okay, that brings us to the manager's update on capital projects.
Mr. Mayor. As you're aware, the RFQ has been released. It was linked online to the American Planning Association website. It was forwarded to other consultants that were referred to me, and also other consultants, staff had spoken with last summer. With regard to a few of the comments that have been made recently about the RFQ, I guess I was taking my direction back from, if you go back to the minutes on November 25th. There were some comments made by the mayor-elect at that point which outlined some concept or some ideas for an RFQ. And it's on page 26 of your minutes. Direct the manager to publish an RFQ as soon as possible. Review the master plan, accept statements of qualifications up to mid-December, hold a short special meeting before Christmas to approve the contract, and I think in subsequent conversations, we kind of backed off of that one. But D was to direct the consultant to write a preliminary report at the January 27th, 2014 meeting, and then delay the vote on the rezoning application until February 10th, 2014. He made some other comments about a possible committee that had 15 or so members, but the thing that came out, the actual action that occurred during the meeting was with regard to the RFQ. And based on that timeline, I put in the timeline that you saw in the RFQ that went out. And so it was based on that experience that we took that timeline. With regards to the word marginal, I mean, that was kind of put in there as if you go through your thesaurus and through different words that we could have used in there, was marginal about one. I'm not sure if expedited or quick or things of that nature would be appropriate. So we used marginal to help possibly direct the consultant to think of proposal in terms of the November 21st master plan document, which is the one we legally have signed for us now. And so to take a look at that and offer ways to improve that. And it was my understanding that that direction was not supposed to revisit or reform the master plan at that point. It was to take a look at the master plan, look for ways, look for suggestions, do things of that nature. As far as any issues of may present to the town board or any public hearing, I don't think there's anything in the RFQ that would preclude us from doing that. I think I got to point out, I guess, also too, that we don't have any cost estimates yet for doing this. To take that one step further, we don't have a budget to do this, except for the planning budget that we have on hand, which was originally slated to do the Unified Development Ordinance. So without a cost-sharing agreement with the developer, we're kind of factoring in some cost issues as well. And so from that standpoint, I wanted to make sure that we were getting the most information as possible. I don't think that there would be any reason that we wouldn't have a public hearing at all, or that we wouldn't have a presentation to the town board. But I wanted to approach it from the standpoint that we would receive the information first, and then if necessary, depending on cost, decide how we can proceed moving forward. Then finally, too, I think Mayor Terry summarized, there were some previous concerns that were addressed, and he summarized it well, that until you actually approve a contract, nothing is set in stone. I mean, this is an opportunity for us to determine who is qualified out there to take a review of this project in the timeline that we had discussed this for. And so it was also in the minutes and also in the motion, it was asked of me to negotiate, to select that consultant and negotiate that contract, and then present that to you for your approval, at which point, after you've been presented with that information, you can make a determination from there. So that's kind of the basis that I worked for. If you guys have a different take on that, I'm definitely open to work through it.
Yeah, let me take the first shot here. I think it's counterproductive to spend a lot of time doing a line-by-line critique of the RFQ. When you understand what an RFQ does, it asks a couple of simple questions. It provides some simple information. It alerts the public that the town's getting ready to do something, and asks a certain group of consultants, do you want to participate? It says, if you do want to participate, send us your qualifications. And everything else in that RFQ is just icing on the cake to help them understand whether or not it's a project that's of interest to them. So that RFQ, in my mind, was perfectly, totally adequate to the job of alerting the planning consulting community of what we're doing. And I think it'll get plenty of submissions for Mr. Grusbeck to go through, and I don't have any issues with the RFQ. Now, that being said, if the board wants to give Mr. Grusbeck some additional guidance before he seeks his fee proposal, I think that would be fine. I think in the RFQ it says they'll review our ordinances and review the master plan. If we want to add to that, review the minutes of the public hearing or review whatever else, the board should tell you that before you go seek a fee proposal. And I guess I'd ask the board, do you want an opportunity, after he selects the consultant, does the board want an opportunity to review the scope? And, you can get the consultant to give you a fee proposal, a line item fee proposal. Well, I'll charge you so many dollars to review your ordinances. I'll charge you so many dollars to review the master plan. If you want me to also read the minutes of all the public hearings, that'll be another so many dollars. We could get an itemized fee proposal, and we could decide what we wanted to do and what we would forego. So that's where I am on the RFQ. I think it was perfectly adequate to the task.
I do feel that the town board should have some say about who gets selected.
We disagree on that. So
I feel strongly about that. We should be able to review the resumes and have some say in it.
I consider that a staff role, actually.
It's a pretty big deal.
Well, it is, but that goes into like an operational thing to me, which I don't think is.
It's not a staff person then. This is a consultant that we are hiring to review something that's going to have a profound impact on the town of Pittsboro. And I feel that we should have some voice in it. It's not a staff person. That's my feeling about it.
Well, I don't think Mr. Grusbeck's proposing to make the selection alone. I haven't asked him about it because, frankly, in my 20-some years experience of doing this, I've been in his position before, and I've never seen an elected board get involved in selecting either engineers or planning consultants. You give the guidance to the manager. Now, he may have Mr. Bass help him, he may have Mr. Royal help him, he may have the county planning director come and sit on the interview panel and help him select the most qualified consultant, but I think it's not something that we as elected officials want to get involved in.
I just find that shocking that we would not have a part in that, something of this magnitude.
I think I agree with Mr. Terry and Commissioner Turner. I actually think that Mr. Grusbeck, and I'm sure that he's going to have other staff to help him in reference to reviewing the information and actually going on and interviewing that particular individual. I think that he is the town manager, and he should be able to make that decision as well as with the staff's input in the review process.
Well, I'm not saying that in any reference to Mr. Rusbeck, because obviously he's qualified. I just would be nice to be a part of something that's such an important part of this upcoming process. Did you want to say something?
I mean, again, I'm open to your direction. Page 36 of the minutes, which haven't been approved yet, the motion was made by Commissioner Foley to table the vote on Chatham Park until staff has had time to retain the services of a highly qualified consultant, and to authorize the town manager to send an RFQ, and it was seconded and approved. So, I mean, if there's another direction on that, that's, you guys need to sort that out. But that's the direction I was given up to this point.
Ben, I would just say that, I don't mean to be too pushy here, but this is the business I was in for the last 20-some years in the state of North Carolina. And I've been on Mr. Rusbeck's side of the table, never been on this side of the table. But I never, in 17 years working in Chapel Hill and 5 years working here, I never had elected officials sit on a panel to select either an engineer or a planning consultant or a space needs consultant or a fleet utilization consultant. That was always, we got guidance from the elected officials about what was the scope of services that the elected officials wanted to retain, and then it was an administrative task for the manager or the department head to go and do the advertisement and make that selection. And so that's the body of experience that I've come from. I understand, I agree with you 100%. It's an incredibly important piece of work, but I think the best practices commonly used in the state of North Carolina is that that's an administrative task, best left to the manager and the staff.
There's never been one this size in North Carolina. This just seems pretty important. We had a committee that selected the sheriff. We had committees that did other appointments. So that's why it seems to me that this qualifies in that same league. This is important.
Personally, I have to agree with other commissioners. I do have complete confidence in our staff, and I feel like that should be the way we should move.
Well, I just want to state, my voice has nothing to do with my life. I have complete confidence in the staff as well. I'm not that. I just would like to be a part of the process.
And I hear you too, but I'm in my mind, it goes into roles and responsibilities of staff versus governing board and other boards I've been on, which is completely different from this one, I'll say, but you don't get involved in operations. That's something that your staff does, but that's just been my experience.
And if I could just offer a suggestion too, and Commissioner Foley has had, made some excellent suggestions about wanting to make sure that the board is fully aware of what's going on during this process. And I think it's totally appropriate that, as I get some information, that I be able to share that with the board as soon as I get it. And you're certainly able at that point to reflect on it and provide any feedback as needed. But as far as the actual task of coming up with, sorting through the information, coming up with a recommendation, trying to hammer out a contract and presenting it to you, and that's something that you charged me with up to this point until you guys decide to do something otherwise. So I don't know that, unless you guys want to take this, I don't know that I'm necessarily asking for a vote here. But I mentioned this by way of responding to some of the issues that have been carried forward with regard to the RFQ, and I'm just trying to kind of re-explain how it is we came to this point. That's all I'm doing. Don't need to tear a Band-Aid off or do anything like that.
Well, I think we have consensus. I'm not going to call for a vote, but I think we have consensus that your charge remains the same. You've advertised for statements of qualifications to come in. They should be, I don't know if you got any should be starting to get some soon. I think one thing the board does need to consider is before you make your, you're going to make a recommendation and get a fee proposal from a consultant. But I think if we need to refine that scope of work based on some of the input we've been getting, if we want to do more than, right now, am I correct that in the minimal scope of work we put in the RFQ is review our ordinances and review the master plan? Is that?
Let's review the plan development district ordinances and review the proposed master plan.
Okay.
And then provide a report to me. There would be some consultation with myself and with staff probably in between. And then maybe submit a report to the town board. Now that fee proposal would include a presentation to the town board.
Okay.
Now, if you wanted to do, if you wanted, to make sure that there's a couple of ways that you could attack that one too. I mean, if you wanted to go and make that presentation to the town board a public hearing or hold a public hearing on a separate occasion, I can make sure that we have some fees outlined for that as well.
Well, I think in most contracts, you'll have the scope of work, and there'll be a fixed price for that, and you'll have an hourly rate as part of the contract. If you add work to the contract, if you say, so you get their report and you say, well, we really wish you'd have read the minutes of the 2 public hearings we had and commented on it, then we could add that later. But I don't know, is everybody comfortable with the scope we've given them now?
Well, I think I'm happy to hear this point of clarification on scope, that the review is the PDD ordinance and the master plan, and not that it's a wholesale review of all the ordinances.
No, not all of our
Right.
land use
And that's what,
ordinances, yeah.
and that's what, and I'll exchange some emails with Mr. Terry to get some of these clarifications, and review of all of the ordinances seemed like a rather onerous and expensive task given the time frame that we outlined. So it was, I remember the comments that were made by Mayor Terry at that meeting involved and during the workshop also came back to the PD ordinance. So
Right.
that's where I was at.
Yeah, and that makes sense to me now. I think that goes without saying that to do that, there is going to be dipping into other ordinances that the consultant's going to want to read, but I think that's up to them to take that on with the objective of the PDD and the master plan. I think that's the correct scope.
Let me ask this. We have the land use plan also, and I was wondering, should he also review the land use plan and make sure the Chatham Park master plan is consistent with that land use plan, as well as the ordinance?
I think they will seek out those documents in order to perform the task of reviewing the PDD and the master plan. Yeah, I think they will do that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think in the contract negotiation process, once the town manager has made his selection and he calls the person in and says, okay, now we need to sit down and talk about a contract, there'll be some give and take, and the consultant will probably say, well, listen, in order for me to do a good job, I'm going to need to do this, I'm going to need to review this ordinance, I'll need to see your land use plan, I'll need to see, and there'll be a give and take there, and that will end up in a final draft contract that'll come to the board for approval. So we'll get a look at it after he's done negotiating, and he and the selected consultant have agreed upon a scope of work and a fee proposal. We'll see it as a proposed contract for our approval. So I think we haven't lost control of the process. So I'm pretty comfortable going forward. Stay the course. Any other questions on this? So,
thanks for that discussion. I appreciate that. The other thing that I would mention, and I won't go down word for word here, but the pavement condition survey, as we mentioned before, we received that, and you had that in your packet, as well as an FYI item. Obviously, it takes a look at, it takes an overview of our condition of our streets and places order of priority in different treatments in taking care of those streets. And as always, they identified a lot more in repair and maintenance than the annual received from Howellville. So as we get moving on this budgeting process and talk about that, we'll have to kind of really sharpen our pencils and roll up our sleeves and every other cliche to make sure that we're going about it the right way, but at least we have some basis and some science to begin to try to do that. So take a look at it. If you have any questions, let us know, and we can certainly provide more information here in the near future. The annual town audit, you also received in your packet that the audit was approved, and it did provide some recommendations to the town. The finance director, Ms. Kirkhead, is taking the L along with, it seems like a lot of people in the community lately. So she's not here tonight, but if you'll look at those recommendations in the back, one piece in particular that I would mention is that the LGC is going to require us to, I think there was a comment on this during a previous meeting, in terms of the administration fee that the general fund charges to the enterprise fund. LGC is now going to require us to put those charges in the appropriate funds. So in other words, if I'm charging, my predecessor can of course probably attest to that spreadsheet, it kind of goes through and provides a percentage of time that each staff person would spend in each account. Well, we're going to have to actually take another look at that during this budgeting process.
I kind of thought what they were saying was what I tried to say when the auditor was here, was that we're calling this a transfer of funds from transfer of money from one fund to the other, and it's really not. It's a fee for services. And
yeah, well,
I thought they were supporting what I was saying.
No, it's. I mean, if you look at the way there's a, I was looking at this before the meeting. It's 100, and the actual transfer fund that we received from the enterprise fund and the general fund is in the neighborhood of $190,000.
Yeah.
It's a flat out transfer that's predicated on those percentages.
It's a cost allocation table, yeah.
So we're going to have to do something different with that. That was the major one that kind of has Mandy wringing her hands a little bit. But other than that, I think everything came through pretty well, and the other things that they suggested seem to be doable. The wastewater treatment plant generator replacement project continues to move forward. We're still shooting for mid-February on that. I believe that the base, the concrete slab was installed last week. Electric transfer switch was delivered, and that should be installed by the 29th. And we should be receiving the new generator by the end of this month as well. So hopefully we can button that up by mid-February. East Street sidewalk again, as soon as we can get some time to put some options together for that, we will. The other things I think are pretty self-explanatory. And then finally, the only other thing that was mentioned either during the retreat or a previous meeting, we will be looking to have the soil erosion and sedimentation ordinance at the next meeting. That's been reviewed by everyone involved, and now just has to have you guys take another look at it and, if appropriate, approve that interlocal agreement. So, look for that at the next meeting. And with that, I am done. Unless you have any other questions.
Okay, that brings us, I believe, to commissioner concerns. Commissioner Farrell?
I just have one thing I'd like to, Mr. Wilcox, I think he did talk to our chief of police today, but I think we have some really great news coming to the town of Pittsboro and our fire department. Our ISO rating in town dropped from a 6 to a 4, and in the district it went from a 9 to a 5. That is outstanding. I mean, there are some municipalities in the state of North Carolina that are not rated at a 4. So that's really outstanding. We should give a great thanks to our fire department. And it also includes our mutual aid departments, which is just about every department in the county is also involved in this.
And the new water lines.
Yeah, oh yeah, the new water lines, the pressures that we have, the equipment, it just goes on and on. It's a pretty in-depth thing to get your rating drop like this, so homeowners need to take advantage of this and get their insurance down.
Well, that's what I
Call
was gonna
your
say, right?
insurance.
It makes a big difference for
Yes,
homeowners. and
oh yes,
the
every
homeowners.
point down makes a lot of, on your homeowners. So that's all I have, but I think if you see you guys out and about, thank them, they'll appreciate it.
Well, I think a good point to make, though, also, is the fact that the water line was a substantial cost. It was a substantial headache. But the dividend is a much higher water quality and water performance perspective from fire protection, which gives us the ability for all citizens to hopefully recapture some of that expenditure on that infrastructure item by a reduction in their homeowners insurance policy. So, Bill, if you'll remind everybody to call their insurance agents and see what they can get done.
So I got a question, Commissioner Farrell. If they call their insurance agent, the insurance agent is going to want some documentation, who?
You can get that through the fire department, but the insurance, they will have it. It goes straight to the
Goes straight to
insurance.
them, okay.
They're not gonna go out of their way to tell you how you want to reduce your premium by no ways. You're gonna have to contact your
So it's
insurance.
reported to
Sarah
them?
Thompson
Yeah.
State Park has already had a lot of people at her door, so that's good, works out.
Good.
She said it was automatic, actually.
Did she say that?
Oh, really?
So, yeah, but I think she also said when your term ends, it doesn't start until your
Until your
existing
policy is
policy
renewed.
renewed, right?
Does that mean existing customers, whoever, whatever insurance company they're on, will get a reduced bill next time, or?
I don't know the details of the
I don't
insurance
leave
part.
on that.
I think everybody has to manage their own policy and make a phone
I
call.
think so.
Call that 1-800 number.
I think they have to call.
Commissioner Foley. Commissioner Gill.
I'm curious to know where we stand with the Jordan Lake stormwater documents. There were some outstanding documents that needed to be developed, such as surety, easement, that kind of thing. And we heard at the work session that someone was surprised to hear that they were now subject to these new regulations. And so wanted to know what the status of those additional documents are. Because I think that we were gonna take a look at them.
We got them, and I apologize, I could email them out. Mr. Messick came up with the final copy a month ago or more. It's a easement and surety document. I should send that out to commissioners so we can take a look.
Okay. Good. And Commissioner Farrell was working on the sidewalk at 902. And I think we kind of tabled that to try to get a rough idea on the cost, and I don't know if we've made any progress with that.
I've not made much progress quite yet. It's only so much time in the day.
I understand.
My understanding is we were looking at the curb and gutter versus the 13 feet.
Yeah.
We received the survey. We received the survey for that, and then you were gonna draw up some different cost estimates for that. We talked about that, it's just, again, we've got the Jordan Lake Partnership application coming up, and basically, we're waking them all from President, trying to put that together in addition to some of the budget stuff that has to be recently, so we'll stay on that.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's it.
Mr. Ball.
I have one quick question, and it's in regards to the the issue with all the wind on Saturday and the trees that had fallen in the street. Okay, when Duke Energy restores the power, are they responsible for removing those trees out of the street? Or is that something that the town of Pittsburgh does? And do we need to call, because this is what someone asked me, and I was like, I don't know. So is there somebody, is there someone that
I'll get you
should
a
be called?
definitive answer. I mean, I've seen it handled, I mean, it's especially like a combat situation, so forgive me for using the analogy, you kind of try to do what you can do with the personnel and the assets that you have available. So it's not uncommon for our crews. I mean, Percy, when he left, Chief Crutchfield, when he left here, was hauling trees out of the streets. So it's, as far as responsibilities go, I can give you a definitive answer on legally how that shakes out. But operationally, we try, I think everybody tries to do what they can in those situations to help the power utility get things moving.
But they are okay with calling the town of Pittsboro?
What's that again?
They can, if there's a citizen, the tree over there and they,
Please, yeah,
they
we
can
can
call
find,
us.
yeah, you know, we're familiar point of contact for folks.
Okay.
We won't turn away a phone call at all. If there's another number to provide, we can certainly do our best to market that information as well. So, I mean, power outages, I think you're probably further ahead reporting power outages to the standard utility number, utility provider number. But that's not to say that on issues, you know, storm drainage and you know, down power lines and things of that nature, yes, we'll take the call, we'll try to expedite it and queue it as best as we can.
I think they had called the power company, but they were just concerned about the tree
Okay.
still being in the street.
Yeah, I can tell you what from a couple of hurricanes and tornadoes experience in Chapel Hill, I can tell you that when new power comes through, they'll cut just enough of the tree to get the line up and off the ground. And then after that, they get in their truck and leave. And the responsibility is this: if the tree falls in your yard and the trunk of the tree is in your yard, then you need to hire an independent contractor to come get the tree out of your yard. If it falls across a state road, then DOT will come and get it. If it falls across a town road, out of a town right away, then the town's responsible to come and get it. That's the...
Yeah, I was hearing in terms of, is there a tree, is there a situation that impacts, you know, power or energy or something like that, and then how is it dealt with, and how do we expedite it? Yeah, I think you're right.
Call 911 and then 911 knows all those other agencies to get hold of them.
Well, so they would call, they just want to know who do they need to call at the time. That's what they asked me. Because it's in the street, it's in one of our streets, Duke's already done all they're gonna do.
Yeah, call the town.
Call the town, just an emergency number of the town.
Right.
And so who would be removing that? Would be Mr. Poteet's people, or would he get David Tree or someone?
If Mr. Poteet couldn't handle it with his people, theoretically, we could call a tree contractor, he knows them for it.
So would they come and do it in an situation where people you can't get around the tree? Would they come out that evening or that night or
This is all
whatever?
speculation.
Speculation.
Yeah, I would imagine they would, I mean, if the tree's in the middle of the street, one way or another, by hook or crook, we'll do our best to get the tree out.
Okay.
So,
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
I don't have anything at this time, thank you.
Okay, on mayoral updates, I'm going to go to my first EDC meeting tomorrow, so I don't have an update on that. RPO is, let me scratch that off there. And I will be getting those updates from Commissioner Fiocco. Solid waste, why is it?
I'm the solid waste person,
Okay.
but we haven't had a meeting in a while, so I don't have any updates.
Fairgrounds Association, did the mayor do that?
Sometime, but I don't have any.
Okay. PMA downtown. Merchants Association.
It's actually now the PBA.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was Mayor Lowell and have a meeting with us, folks?
I actually usually attend their meetings, I haven't been to one in probably the last 2 meetings.
Okay. Well, we may adjust that for next time.
Yeah.
And I'll just say, there was a mayor and chairs meeting last week, and had a good presentation from Secretary Tato of NCDOT, and his basic message was that he's been in the job a year now, and his primary mission from the governor was to make DOT a more customer service oriented and friendly organization. And I think that was largely directed at DMV and licensing and that sort of things, but also spills over into RPO issues. With that, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Good job.
Not in public.
Okay, records are made to be broken.